What's up, guys? Not a good weekend. 4-7, I believe. 2-3 yesterday. You do have these down swings. I was running really well for like a month or so, having a really good month prior to that. But we're gonna keep it going. I got some basketball plays today on a somewhat limited card today. Maybe I'm not limiting myself enough because I have 3 plays, but we'll see. 1 and 2 in college basketball yesterday. Unfortunately, after I was off to a good start in college basketball, I don't know what was I like 6-2 before I ran into that. I don't even remember, something like that. It started nice. App State with the outright win upset of Auburn. It was a bad spot for Auburn, and App State plays really good defense, and that was what they did there. They held Auburn very much in check in the game and pretty much led the whole way and won in the end outright. So that was good. It was a good way to start it. Then Pitt was just pretty much, they put themselves in a huge hole. That was just not good. And then they decided to tease me by making a big late comeback to make it look like maybe there's a possibility they're actually going to pull off like the miracle comeback here. And they got pretty close, but not enough. It was not to be. And Wichita, I think Wichita should have covered. They were within that number for much of that game. It was not a very high scoring game, and they were within it. They were within 2 points, I think, in the final, like 1 or 2 minutes of the game. They're within 2, and you're taking them as a 7.5 point underdog. Like that's a pretty good position to be in. They should cover that. And they somehow wound up not being able to do that and losing by, I think, 10 is what it was. I don't even know what happened. I wasn't watching the end of it. I watched some of the middle of the game, and they were in striking distance in the middle of the game for sure. But like even to win the game outright potentially. So I don't know what happened there. They were down 2 that late, and then they wound up losing by 10. No clue. I think they probably should have covered. I think it was probably the right side. They probably did well enough to cover. Same goes over on the NFL side for the Jets. That was just, the Jets offense is just so bad, man. Like, if you told me going into that game that Atlanta was going to score 13 points, I'd be like, yeah, I'm all over the Jets getting 3. Like, are you kidding me? Atlanta scoring almost nothing in the game, and then they still cover because the final, I believe, was 13-8, and it was 13-8 for a long time. It was 10-8. The Jets were down 2 for much of the game. And I was like, well, they'll cover if they lose by 2. Yeah, and then they just wound up on the wrong side of it. They wound up giving up a field goal, and then they had like an entire quarter to potentially do something, and they never did. If they'd even gotten a field goal in the remainder of that game, they would have wound up covering the number again. So that one, the game kind of was the way that I thought it would be, an ugly, really low-scoring game. You take the points there. It was just the Jets' offense was just so bad. They wound up taking Boyle out of the game. He was just awful. Tommy Boyle, I don't even know what his name is. He is awful. He sucks so bad. And then they put in Trevor Siemian, and he did not get the job done either. He had the shot towards the end there. The Jets had one final possession where they had to go a long distance, and I think they actually got up to midfield or past midfield before they finally lost and succumbed and turned it over on downs. So that sucked. Let's move to today's card, man. So there's an NHL card, but I just don't like anything that I see on the NHL slate, man. I just can't do it. There are a couple of zigzags. Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. Pittsburgh's up from -110 to -123 as a road favorite, but it looks like they have 80% of the tickets, but 71% of the cash. So it looks like they have the public percentages on them, even though the number has gone up on them, and they just lost at home to Philadelphia in the prior game. So it's kind of one of those road reversal revenge angles there where that team just beat you on your home ice, and now you go to their home ice and play them. So the slight lean would be to the Penguins there for that reason, but I don't think I could do that. And then Dallas and Tampa Bay is kind of a zigzag type of spot as well, where Dallas, I believe, just won at home against Tampa Bay. Now they're going to Tampa Bay, and they're sitting at -108 as a road favorite with 62% of the tickets, but 72% of the cash on Tampa as the slight home underdog there. And Tampa, maybe you're getting a little bit of value on them because they probably are a little bit better now that they have their goaltender Vasilevsky back. I don't know if he's playing in this game or not, but I believe, he came back not long ago. So the Tampa Bay's value, the odds on them still might be kind of it's factoring in the fact that he's back, but it still might be factoring in their performance up until the point where he came back, which probably wasn't as good as it is and will be with him back on the team. So they might be a little bit of an undervalued commodity for that reason. But Dallas also just won at home against Tampa. Now they're starting a road trip. Although starting a road trip, you tend to be focused. But are you going to be focused on the team you just beat at home? And you have the Florida Panthers next, even though Tampa's pretty good. I don't know that you're necessarily going to overlook Tampa, but you might if you just beat them. And you have Florida on deck, who are one of the contenders in the Eastern Conference and, of course, made the Stanley Cup final last year. So that's the way I look at those couple of games. I don't know. I don't really want to do anything on those, but that is the situation there with those. Going to college basketball, we got one play here. And if you know the way that I handicap, this is almost like an automatic. It's very small card in college basketball, but there is one situation I like, one play I'm going with, and that's going to be on Furman. Taking, what did I take? 12 and a half. It looks like it's kind of around 11 and a half right now. I took 12. There might still be 12s out there. It looks like it's sitting at Arkansas 11 and a half or 11 and a half with juice as the home favorite. The situation here is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple with the Arkansas team. You guys know the way that I handicap. Arkansas just beat Duke. They just played North Carolina and Duke in back-to-back games. They lost to North Carolina by 15, and they played Memphis before that and played them to within 5. But, the Memphis and North Carolina games are both in one of those early tournaments, though. So I forget where that tournament, that was the Bahamas tournament, I think the Atlantis tournament. But so they did play two good teams there. Played Memphis close, and then kind of just maybe ran out of gas against a good North Carolina team. Then they played Duke, which I believe was their first game back home. It was on their home floor. They beat Duke. They upset Duke as a 4.5 point underdog. So Arkansas may have been a little bit undervalued going into that game. But Duke is a very highly ranked team, and Arkansas, I think, wasn't even ranked. So that looked like one of those kind of trap situations where it's like, why is Duke only laying 4.5 or something against an unranked Arkansas team? Well, Arkansas showed you why, and they won the game outright. And that was a huge win, an upset over a top 10 team, a huge court storming for Arkansas. Their fans rushed the court. And when you have a court storming, you tend to want to almost automatically go against that team in the next game, especially in a situation like this where they've just played 3 good teams in a row. They just pulled off the huge upset against Duke. Now they host Furman. They have the Furman Paladins coming in, who are a team. What conference are they in again? I don't even remember. They won their conference last year, though, the Southern Conference. But this year they're a 4-4 team. They lost their best player that they had last year. I believe they lost him to graduation, I want to say, although they do still have, I believe, 3 starters that they had on last year's team. And they lost 2 of them, but one of the guys they lost was their top scorer from last year. But they do still have 3 guys from the starting lineup last year. And I think the guy who was like the 6th man last year is now in their starting lineup. So they do have guys that have played together for a while on this Furman team. So that might help Furman a little bit. But they're, of course, even though they made the tournament last year, I think you could easily overlook them. And you just played Memphis, North Carolina, and Duke. You upset Duke. Had a court storming, huge win. You might be like basking in the glow of that. You actually have like an extra day or 2 off because you didn't play on Saturday. Arkansas did not play on Saturday, I believe. They beat Duke mid to late week, I believe is when that game was. So they've been sitting around at home, reading the press clippings, getting all high and mighty on themselves, and they do have another ranked opponent up next in 5 days against Oklahoma, who is also coming into their house, I believe. Is that also a home game? I think it is. No, it is not, actually. It's in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so that's weird, even though it's listed as a home game for Arkansas. So it's some neutral site game, but it's in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so that's a little weird. But they have Oklahoma up next. That's another big game there. You're coming off that huge win over Duke. This is like a classic letdown spot after you upset a top 10 team on your own floor. Your fans storm the court. You're getting all crazy. You're getting high on yourselves, getting high as well, probably. high and drunk, baby. It's college. And you're just sitting around at home. You got Eric Musselman as your coach. That guy tends to overreact to things emotionally. Okay, I've never been a fan of him. I wasn't a fan of him on Nevada. I think he did not keep his Nevada players' emotions in check when he was over there. Might be a little bit of the same going on for Arkansas. It's a classic letdown spot, man. That's all there is to it. I'm playing Furman plus whatever it is, plus 12. So that's the first play. That's the college basketball play. Let's do it. Then in the NBA, there are only 2 games on the slate, and I'm just going to play both of them because I can't help myself. Because why not? Even though there are slight reasons to not want to be on either of these games, but I think the situation is strong enough that I'm just going to do it. You guys know what I'm doing. The earlier game here, Boston Celtics at Indiana Pacers. I'm going to fade the Boston Celtics. They just took back control of their division with a big win over the Philadelphia 76ers. Well, they were already leading the 76ers in that game. They were already leading the 76ers coming into that game, but this just increased their lead over the Sixers in the division to 3 games. That's a big win over your rival there in the 76ers. Huge win. So this is kind of a letdown spot for the Boston Celtics now here. And they do have Cleveland up next. So I don't know if you're going to overlook an Indiana Pacers team. It's kind of this one weird single road game. And you're going out to play a 10-8 Pacers team. I don't know. You might overlook them. And the Celtics played the Pacers once this year. And what did they do against them? They beat them by 51 points. They scored 155 against the Pacers back on November 1st. So, you beat this team by 51 points and put up 155 against them last time you played them. You're coming off a huge win over the Philadelphia 76ers to really pad your lead in your division there. Are you really going to take the Pacers totally seriously going on the road for this weird single game? I'm not so sure that you will. And they have the Cleveland Cavs up next to, they haven't been playing well either, but there's a big break before they play them. That's in 8 days, but the Cavs were a playoff team last year. They're still a team whose name kind of carries some weight there. I think this is a letdown spot for the Celtics. And we got to keep in mind all the injury situations that are going on here, because in the Philadelphia game, I think the Celtics only won that game by 6. So Philadelphia did step up and play that game close. It was a tough, close game, which kind of also factors into my handicapping here. That was a close game. The Celtics shot really well, over 50% from the field. Philadelphia was 46 or so percent. So not too bad on their side either, but Celtics shot really well in the game. It was a really close game, a really big effort game the whole time, which I think, and that was with Celtics have 2 days off now, but I think it's a letdown spot. And that game was such a huge effort game that might still be having some effect there. But also keeping in mind, like I was about to say, the 76ers were without Joel Embiid, Maxey, and one of their other guys for that game. They had some big time injuries in that game. Who else was out? One of their other players was out in that game too. I can't remember who. Oh, Batum was out as well. So none of those guys played in that game for the 76ers, and the Celtics still only won by 6. So that kind of makes it look less good. I'm pretty sure you played a very shorthanded 76ers team, and you only came out of it with that close a win on your home floor. The Celtics were a 6-point favorite, which was factoring in all those injuries there. So that maybe is a little bit concerning, really, that the Celtics didn't win that game by more against a really shorthanded Sixers team there. So I don't know what to think about that, although that just makes that win look a little bit less good. But the Celtics coming off that huge win, huge effort, I think they're in a letdown spot. They have to go to Indiana, who, like I said, I'm not sure they're going to take them seriously at all after absolutely destroying them the one time they played them this year. That game was almost laughable. It was a ridiculously high point total for the Celtics. They're a historic high almost. I think it was the second highest point total in Celtics history or something like that. You might not take them seriously coming off that huge game. So I'm going with the Pacers. The Celtics are up from 4.5 to 5. It looks like with 71% of the tickets on them, but 63% of the cash on the other side on the home underdog in the Indiana Pacers. I'm taking the Pacers +5. Let's do that. And then let's finish it out with also a play in the other game, which is the Pelicans and Kings. I'm going to fade the Kings here. And the Kings look like they're down from a 4.5-point favorite to a 4-point favorite. They got 70% of the cash on them, but 67% of the tickets. I'm not sure I totally buy that cash discrepancy because it does look like the line is moving against the Kings a little bit. I think they're certainly going to be the public team here after what people have seen recently, which is why I'm going to do this and be on the New Orleans Pelicans here. Pelicans have been one of the teams that I've played on a lot. The Kings have faced, they're coming off like a slew of big games, man. Even though the one thing that gives me pause here is, they lost 2 games in a row to New Orleans. The only time they played New Orleans this year was not long ago. That was November 20th and 22nd. They played 2 games at New Orleans, and they got blown out in the first one. And then they played better in the second one, but somehow in the zigzag still wound up losing by 5. So they lost twice to New Orleans, and that was, I believe, when New Orleans didn't have CJ McCollum, and McCollum is now back, I believe, for New Orleans, and he's been back in the lineup for a couple of games now. So that is the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause, that Sacramento might have reason to take them seriously just because they lost to them twice. But if you look at what Sacramento played since they played the New Orleans games, they beat Minnesota by double digits on the road to finish that road trip. They came home and had a couple days off, and they had that game against the Golden State Warriors, where they were getting blown out on their home floor by the Warriors. At one point, the Warriors, I think, were beating them like 71-48 or something in that game, and it was still like a double-digit Warrior lead into the fourth quarter, and I don't know what happened, but Sacramento came all the way back and won by 1 in a furious comeback against the Warriors. Then they finally had a letdown again after those 2 huge games there. And they had to play on a back-to-back, even though they were staying at home. They did not do well in the next game against the Clippers, lost that game by double digits. And coming up next, they did have the Denver Nuggets, even though the Clippers are still probably a team that you would take seriously because they did just get James Harden. They got a bunch of good players on that team, and they've been starting to play better with Harden. But that was a bad spot for the Kings, regardless, coming off that huge comeback against Golden State. Then after the loss to LA, they bounced back again. So they've been kind of playing bad, coming off of big games, and playing better, playing better in bounce back spots in general over these recent games here. And that first New Orleans loss, I think they were kind of in a bad spot too, because they had just played the previous night and beaten Dallas in Dallas, which was a bigger win against a bigger opponent. And the first New Orleans game was on a back-to-back, and a third game in 4, and a 4th and 6, and a 6th and 9, I believe. And it was a 4th and 6 all in different cities, and the 6 and 9 were all in different cities too. So that was a really bad spot for the Sacramento Kings there. But now, like I was just alluding to, what I was about to get to, after the LA game, what does Sacramento do? They had a couple days off, and then they beat the Denver Nuggets on their home floor. So now that's what they've been doing. They've been sitting around. Well, they haven't been sitting around. They did that 2 days ago on Saturday. Huge win over the Denver Nuggets. And I think it looks a little bit less good. That was the game that I mentioned that I thought Denver wasn't in a very good spot because they were in a back-to-back. They had just beaten the Phoenix Suns the previous game, and they had to play again the very next night and go from Phoenix to Sacramento. So a little bit of travel there with no time off. The Kings hadn't played since the 29th, so they had multiple days off to get ready for that game. Kings had the much better rest spot, and they were laying a lot of points in that game. They were laying too many points for me to actually want to get involved there, but the Kings did wind up covering it by 1 or 1.5 points or so. They were like a 4.5-point favorite over the Denver Nuggets somehow in that game. And they wound up winning by 6. But that's a huge win for the Kings, man, over the returning champs. That was the first time they played the Denver Nuggets this year. Now they're coming off that. I think they're in a letdown spot, even though, they did lose to New Orleans twice this year. But it was New Orleans without McCollum. Although that might tend to make Sacramento want to take them more seriously because now it's a New Orleans team with a better lineup than the one that they lost to twice. But you're coming up beating the defending champs, man. I think it's a bad spot. It's a pretty bad spot for Sacramento. I think it's kind of a classic letdown spot where you just beat the returning champs. New Orleans hasn't been playing that well, even though, they beat you twice, but you just beat Denver, man. And then New Orleans, on the other hand, they didn't play well in their previous game 2 days ago to start this 2-game road trip. They're going to want to split this road trip here. They lost the first game to Chicago. That's not a good-looking loss. Chicago's been an ugly team this year. That's an ugly loss, man. And maybe they finally succumbed to like a bad spot there because New Orleans had returned home from a 3-game road trip where they lost twice in Utah after they won in LA against the Clippers, which was a big win. After they beat Sacramento, they went to Utah, tough spot into elevation, and lost both games close to Utah. Came back home with only 1 day off, tough return home spot, but they had the 76ers coming in and they were focused, and I was on the Pelicans in that game. That was a bad spot for the 76ers. My analysis is in that video from back on that day. New Orleans won pretty easily in that game. That was a big win for them. Then they didn't suffer the letdown in the next game they had staying at home. The San Antonio Spurs came in, and they're just not a good team, and New Orleans beat them. Then they had to go out on the road the next day, so it was kind of a bad spot, back-to-back. Finally, succumbing to maybe the letdown off of the huge Philadelphia win and the back-to-back and the third, I think it was a third game in 4 days situation, and fourth in 6 or something. Excuse me. And they lost to Chicago. So now I think they're in a bounce-back spot after you lost to Chicago. You know Sacramento's a pretty good team, and you just saw that they just beat the Denver Nuggets. So I think you're going to be focused for this one. You're in a bounce-back spot if you're the New Orleans Pelicans, and the line looks suspicious, man. The last thing I'll say before I got to get out of here, the Kings are a 4-point favorite as it sits right now in this game, and they were 4.5 on the same floor in their previous game against the Nuggets. So people are going to look at this and think, what gives? If the Kings can beat the Nuggets by more than 4 at home, how are they possibly only laying 4 at home to the Pelicans here? Like, if they beat the Nuggets by that much at home, of course they're going to beat the Pelicans by more than that, right? Although maybe they'll look and see that the Pelicans did beat them twice, but maybe they won't even look that far. But the line does look suspicious that it's that low. It looks too easy to take the Kings here. So I'm doing it. I'm on the Pelicans. +4. So those plays one more time are the New Orleans Pelicans +4, Indiana Pacers +5, and Furman Paladins over in college basketball +12. Let's get it done, man. Let's do it. Happy Monday. Oh, and I do have analysis on the NFL game. There is that Monday night game in my video. I will say that line is up to 10 points now. So there has been play driving the Jacksonville Jaguars up. I don't want anything to do with the Jaguars. I think it's way too many points to be laying, especially at 10. The only way that I would look there is to the Cincinnati Bengals plus all those points, but I can't get there, man. I can't play it. And the Jaguars look like they have the cash discrepancy right now at 90% of the cash, but only 85% of the tickets. So I don't know what to think about that. They're certainly the public team, though, so I don't want anything to do with laying all those points with the Jaguars there. Especially coming off that big Houston divisional win revenge game there. So, and Cincinnati really trying to like right the ship with no Burrow there anymore. They're trying to get something done there. They've lost a bunch of games in a row, so they need to bounce back. So that's the way I look at that really quickly. All right, man. Have a good Monday. Peace out.